I see, it did not begin with a public disagreement, it began with a document. Quietly circulated among senior royal offices, the proposed revisions to Queen Camilla's ceremonial authority appeared administrative at first glance, but according to reports and palace interpretations, Princess Anne reacted with unusual force. Within hours, meetings were rearranged, private calls intensified, and a coronation chapter many assumed was closed suddenly reopened. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, the paper seemed harmless enough. A few adjustments, a few ceremonial clarifications, a few lines meant, according to some interpretations, to recognize Queen Camilla's settled position beside King Charles after the coronation. But inside the royal machine, words are never just words. A title is never only a title. A ceremonial phrase can carry the weight of inheritance, influence, and historical memory. And I emerged, that, insiders suggest, is exactly what Princess Anne saw before others dared to say it aloud. For Anne, this was not a matter of personal dislike or palace gossip. It was procedure. It was precedent. It was the thin, almost invisible line between honoring a consort and reshaping the meaning of royal authority itself. Those familiar with her approach describe her as someone who does not panic, does not perform, and does not waste energy on empty outrage. So when her reaction reportedly hardened, people noticed. Not because she raised her voice, but because she understood what a single alteration could become once future courtiers, advisors, and royal households began treating it as precedent. The proposed changes, according to reports, were connected to Camilla's post-coronation ceremonial standing small enough to be explained as practical, but broad enough to make Anne pause. In the language of palaces, such proposals are often dressed in softness. Continuity, support, stability, recognition. Yet beneath that polished language, Anne reportedly saw a more dangerous possibility, that the crown was being personalized at a moment when it needed to remain above personality. King Charles, still navigating a reign marked by strain, illness, and pressure from every direction, appeared caught between two loyalties. On one side stood his wife, whose position had been publicly secured in the sun-drenched coronation of 2023. On the other stood the institution itself, older than every marriage, every preference, every private wish. And this is where the atmosphere shifted. Because Anne's objection, as palace whispers suggest, did not challenge Camilla's dignity. It challenged the timing, the wording, and the consequences. Why adjust the meaning of a coronation roll after the coronation itself had already fixed the public image? Why reopen a ceremonial settlement when the monarchy was already under pressure to prove its discipline? Why risk turning a sacred constitutional rhythm into something that looked, even faintly, like personal advancement? That was the fear. Not that Camilla would suddenly gain sweeping authority. Not that a single document could overturn centuries of practice overnight. The fear was subtler, colder, and far more serious. That the monarchy might begin bending its own language to satisfy the needs of the moment. And once that begins, the old guard knows exactly how dangerous the road can become. But Anne's concern was never about titles alone. It was about what changing one line in a document could mean for the future of the crown. Coronations end in a day, but their paperwork can shape generations. Behind processions, robes, and balcony appearances lies a system of precedent so rigid that even symbolic changes can echo for decades. That is the hidden truth most people never see. The public remembers crowns, carriages, music, and vows. The institution remembers wording. Every phrase attached to a coronation carries a kind of quiet power, because the monarchy does not only survive through ceremony, it survives through memory, repetition, and recognition. What happened once can be cited later. What was written once can be used again. What was allowed once can become expectation. And inside the House of Windsor, that is where small changes become dangerous. Ceremonial hierarchy may look old-fashioned from the outside, but within the royal household it is a language of authority. Who stands where, who is named first, who is included in a document, and who is given a defined role after a sacred rite, none of it is accidental. These details form the invisible architecture of the crown. They decide not only how the monarchy presents itself today, but how future advisors may interpret the limits of royal influence tomorrow. A line written for one reign can quietly reach into the next. That is why coronation records matter. They are not ordinary papers left to gather dust. They become part of the royal bloodstream, part of the Mayasan emerged institutional memory that courtiers, private secretaries, constitutional advisors, and future households can study when uncertainty returns. And uncertainty always returns. A reign changes. A monarch weakens. A prince becomes king. A consort becomes widow. A family disagreement becomes a constitutional headache. Then, suddenly, someone reaches back into the archive and asks, "What was done before?" Princess Anne understands this better than most. Her power has never depended on glamour, popularity, or soft public reinvention. Her strength comes from discipline. She has spent decades operating inside the monarchy's hardest rules, accepting the burden of duty without demanding the spotlight. That reputation matters because Anne is not seen as someone who objects lightly. When reports suggest she raises concern, the concern does not sound like jealousy. It sounds like warning. And the warning, according to palace interpretations, was simple. Modernization cannot become a mask for rewriting boundaries. The monarchy must adapt, yes. It must survive changing times, changing media, changing public expectations. But preservation is not stubbornness when the thing being preserved is the structure itself. Anne reportedly saw the proposed adjustment not as a harmless update, but as a test of whether the crown still knew the difference between public image and institutional authority. That difference is everything. Public image is what the world sees. Institutional authority is what the monarchy becomes when no cameras are present, when the doors close, when documents are signed, and when history starts taking notes. One can be polished, the other must be protected. And in Anne's world, protection means stopping ambiguity before it hardens into precedent. So while supporters may have viewed the proposal as a sensible recognition of Queen Camilla's place beside the king, Anne reportedly looked deeper. She saw the future argument waiting inside the present wording. She saw how a ceremonial adjustment could later be described as established practice. She saw how loyalty to one reign could create confusion for another. And above all, she saw that the crown, once personalized, becomes easier to pressure, easier to reshape, and far harder to defend. And according to palace interpretations, Anne believed this proposal crossed an invisible line. Witnesses may never describe the room the same way, but nearly every version agrees on one detail. Princess Anne did not remain silent. According to palace interpretations, the private discussions did not explode in the way outsiders might imagine. There was no need for spectacle. In royal circles, the most serious objections are often delivered in the calmest voice, and that was precisely what made Anne's reported intervention so difficult to ignore. She was not said to have framed the matter as a personal challenge to Queen Camilla. She did not need to. Her argument, as insiders suggest, was sharper because it sounded procedurally, measured, and impossible to dismiss as emotion. The issue was not Camilla as a woman, a wife, or a crowned queen. The issue was what the institution would be asked to accept once the language of that document changed. That distinction mattered. Anne reportedly understood that if the objection became personal, it could be softened, managed, or painted as family tension. But if it remained procedural, it became something far more dangerous. A formal warning from one of the monarchy's most disciplined defenders. She was, in effect, drawing attention to the machinery beneath the velvet. A ceremonial adjustment might look harmless to the public, but inside the palace, it could create expectations. Expectations become habits. Habits become precedent. And precedent, once allowed to settle, can be almost impossible to reverse without appearing cruel, unstable, or divided. Reports suggest the discussions intensified quickly. Advisors who might have expected a quiet approval process report, themselves examining consequences they had not fully considered. Would the revised language alter how future consorts were understood? Could it create pressure on Prince William's eventual reign? Would it blur the boundary between supporting the monarch and sharing symbolic authority beyond the accepted frame? These were not loud questions, but they were heavy ones. They carried the cold weight of succession. King Charles, according to those familiar with palace dynamics, was placed in the most painful position of all. He was not simply a monarch reviewing paperwork. He was a husband, a brother, and a king whose reign had already been marked by strain. He reportedly urged balance, and balance is often the word used when a palace wants time, silence, and space to breathe. But balance can also become a battlefield when each side believes it is protecting the crown from a different danger. To Camilla's supporters, the proposed changes may have looked like dignity and recognition. I see to An's camp, they looked like uncertainty entering through a side door, and then came the phrase that began to circulate in whispers. The Iron Protocol, not a public decree, not a dramatic confrontation, more like an instinctive tightening of the royal system around its oldest rule. The firm before the family. Under this reported approach, every line would be examined, every implication tested, every ceremonial privilege weighed against the future it might create. Anne's objection was no longer merely resistance. It had become a method. What appeared to be a disagreement over ceremony soon became a battle over succession-era optics. To supporters of the proposal, the changes were neither radical nor ambitious, they were overdue recognition. That was the argument whispered through the softer corners of the royal household. Queen Camilla, they believed, had already endured the long road from controversy to coronation. She had stood beside King Charles through public scrutiny, private, storms, and the heavy loneliness of a reign that arrived later than destiny had promised. To those who defended the revised wording, the document was not a power grab. It was a correction, a practical acknowledgement that the woman crowned beside the king should not be treated as an accessory to history, but as part of the living structure around him. And in that argument, there was political weight. Since the coronation, Camilla's public role had steadily evolved from supporting figure to visible royal partner. She had taken on more engagements, carried more responsibility during difficult periods, and projected a kind of calm continuity when the monarchy needed steadiness most. For some advisors, that visibility had to be reflected somewhere. Not as authority equal to the sovereign, they insisted, but as ceremonial clarity. A monarchy under pressure could not afford confusion around the Queen's presence, her duties, or her place in moments of national significance. The proposal's definition. Miranders reportedly framed it as stability. If Charles's reign was fragile in health and intense in scrutiny, then the institution needed recognizable anchors. Camilla, in their view, had become one of those anchors. Her supporters argued that leaving her role underdefined could create its own problems. Awkward gaps in protocol, uncertainty in planning, and avoidable speculation whenever the king stepped back or delegated ceremonial duties. In the language of palace management, clear wording could prevent chaos. In the language of public image, it could show unity. But that was exactly where the dispute became dangerous, because perception and authority are not the same thing. A queen may be highly visible without becoming institutionally expanded. She may provide reassurance without altering precedent. She may stand at the center of public ceremonies without creating a template. Future courts are forced to explain. This was the narrow passage the palace had to walk, honoring Camilla's poem, without making the crown appear as though it could be revised around personal circumstance. Internally, supporters reportedly defended the proposal with the calm confidence of people who believed they were solving a practical problem. They may have argued that modern monarchy cannot survive by freezing every old boundary in place. They may have said that the public already understood Camilla as queen, and that the paperwork should simply catch up with reality. To them, Anne's resistance risked making the palace look rigid, suspicious, or trapped in old wounds. Why, they might have asked, should recognition be treated like rebellion? Yet the deeper the discussion went, the more the palace seemed to split between two instincts. One side saw adaptation as survival. The other saw restraint as survival. One side feared weakness through ambiguity. The other feared danger through precedent. And between those fears stood King Charles, not merely weighing a document, but weighing how his Tory would interpret the choices made under his name. Because in Windsor circles, no ceremonial phrase dies quietly. It waits. It lingers in files, in memories, in future briefings. It becomes the sentence someone cites years later when another reign faces another crisis. That was why the proposed change, however practical it seemed, carried a shadow far larger than its wording. But inside Windsor logic, practicality alone has rarely settled matters. For King Charles, this was never simply policy. It became another test of leadership during a period already defined by uncertainty. The proposed wording may have looked like a matter for private secretaries, protocol advisors, and constitutional minds, but for Charles it carried a far heavier burden. It touched the two worlds he has spent his reign trying to hold together, the family he loves and the institution he inherited. One is personal, emotional, and painfully human. The other is ancient, unforgiving, and built to survive every prior, not heartbreak. And when those two worlds collide, even a king can find himself trapped in the silence between duty and desire. Reports suggest Charles did not rush to endorse the proposal, but he also did not dismiss it outright. That hesitation became its own signal. To Camilla's supporters, it may have felt like the king was allowing old doubts to shadow a queen who had already been crowned before the nation. To Anne's side, hesitation may have proved that the concerns were serious enough to require examination. In palace politics, silence is rarely empty. It can be protection. It can be delayed. It can be a warning that something once described as simple has become dangerously complicated. Charles, according to palace interpretations, urged balance because balance has often been his instinct in moments of royal pressure. Balance between old expectations and modern realities. Balance between public duty and private loyalty. Balance between the emotional cost of family conflict and the menached, cold demands of constitutional caution. But this time, balance was not easy. Every possible choice carried a wound. Approving the change too quickly risked alarming the institutional guardians. Resisting it too strongly risked appearing to deny Camilla the full dignity of her role. Doing nothing risked letting the palace drift into uncertainty. And around him, the pressure built quietly. Advisors reportedly studied schedules, ceremonial duties, future events, and the long chain of implications that could follow even a modest adjustment. Some may have argued that the king needed a stronger public partnership around him during a difficult reign. Others may have warned that any wording tied to Camilla's expanded role could later be interpreted as a shift in the symbolic balance of the crown. Each argument had logic. Each carried danger. The palace was no longer simply asking what sounded fair. It was asking what history might one day accuse them of allowing. The emotional dimension was impossible to ignore. Princess Anne was not merely a senior royal raising a technical concern. She was Charles's sister, one of the few people who understood the monarchy before it became a media battlefield, before every palace tremor became public drama, before every private decision invited suspicion. Her trust mattered. Her warning mattered. And if she believed the document threatened continuity, then Charles knew he was not dealing with ordinary resistance. He was dealing with the voice of someone shaped by the same mother, the same rules, and the same brutal lesson. The crown survives only when personal feeling bows before institutional discipline. That was the quiet tragedy at the center of the moment. Charles was being asked to defend his queen without weakening the crown, to honor his sister without humiliating his wife, to preserve unity without pretending the disagreement did not exist. The monarchy often speaks in calm language, but beneath that calm was a painful reality. One document had forced the king to confront the limits of affection inside a system that demands sacrifice from everyone, even those closest to the throne. Then came the move that shifted the atmosphere entirely. No speeches, no confrontation. Just paperwork, meetings, and a slowing of momentum. That was how the countermove reportedly began, not with a dramatic rupture, but with the kind of silence that makes palace insiders nervous. The proposal did not collapse in public. It did not become a headline carried by official denial or furious briefing. Instead, according to palace interpretations, it entered a colder and more dangerous place: review. And in the royal system, review can be a velvet-covered word for resistance. A document that once seemed to be moving forward suddenly required another reading, another consultation, another set of eyes trained not on feelings, but on consequences. Princess Anne's reported strategy was not emotional. It was institutional. She did not need to attack the proposal directly if she could force the palace to examine what it truly meant. Every phrase would have to justify itself. Every ceremonial adjustment would have to survive the question that old monarchies ask before they change anything. What happens when this is used again? That question, quiet as it sounds, is brutal. It strips away warmth, loyalty, and personal history. It leaves only precedent standing in the room. Those familiar with royal procedure would recognize the tactic immediately. Slow the paper, broaden the consultation, move the issue from preference to principle. Once that happens, momentum fades. What once looked like a simple internal adjustment becomes a constitutional shadow. Private secretaries become cautious. Advisors begin protecting themselves. Supporters grow less certain. And suddenly the language that once sounded practical starts sounding dangerous, because it must now answer not only for today, but for every reign that may come after. This was, in essence, of Anne's reported iron protocol, Duty over personality, the crown before comfort, the future before the feelings of the present. It was not designed to humiliate Queen Camilla, at least not according to the more careful interpretations. It was designed to prevent the monarchy from making a decision in the warmth of personal loyalty that future generations might regret in the cold light of succession. Anne, shaped by decades of service, knew that the institution cannot afford emotional shortcuts. Not now. Not while the king's reign remained under strain. Not while the public watched every sign of internal weakness. Not while the next era waited just beyond the horizon. Inside palace circles, awareness reportedly grew. What had first appeared to be an administrative adjustment now carried a harder edge. The question was no longer simply whether Camilla deserved recognition. The question became whether recognition, once written into ceremonial architecture, could be separated. Authority. And if it could not, then the proposal was no longer harmless. It was a test. As the reviews continued, the urgency around the document reportedly cooled. Meetings became less decisive. Timelines softened. The confidence that had surrounded the proposal began to thin. No one needed to announce defeat, because royal defeats rarely arrive wearing that name. They arrive as postponements, pauses, careful wording, and sudden silence. They arrive when a document stops traveling quickly through the system and begins to sit, watched by people who now understand the risk attached to every sentence. For Charles, that pause may have offered relief, but it also exposed the depth of the fracture. For Camilla's supporters, it may have felt like dignity delayed. For Anne, it may have looked like the system doing exactly what it was built to do, resisting haste, absorbing pressure, and protecting the crown from decisions made too close to emotion. Yet beneath that procedural calm, something larger had begun to surface. If a small change to ceremonial language could trigger this level of concern, then the monarchy was not merely debating one document. It was confronting the fragile balance between the current reign and the one that must eventually follow. And once the proposal slowed, a bigger question emerged. The real story may never have been about Camilla at all. It may have been about who gets to define the monarchy after transition. Because once the proposal slowed, the palace was left staring at a question far bigger than one queen's ceremonial standing. How much can the monarchy adapt before adaptation begins to look like surrender? How much can a reign personalize its own arrangements before the next reign inherits a problem it did not create? These are the questions that live beneath royal politeness. They are not spoken loudly, because loudness itself would admit there is a crisis. But according to palace interpretations, they were there, pressing against. Every conversation, every pause, every careful review of the document. Legacy and adaptation have always fought inside the crown. The monarchy survives because it changes, but it remains powerful because it refuses to change too easily. That contradiction is its burden and its genius. It must look modern without becoming temporary. It must look human without becoming ordinary. It must honor personal relationships without allowing private emotion to rewrite public structure. And in this reported dispute, that old contradiction returned with brutal clarity. To one side, recognizing Camilla more clearly may have seemed like sensible modernization. To the other, it risked turning a unique personal circumstance into a rule future courts would be forced to manage. That is why precedent matters so deeply in a modern monarchy. It is not just history. It is a weapon, a shield, and a trap. Once something is done, once it is recorded, once it is accepted without objection, it becomes available to everyone who comes after. A future advisor can point to it. A future courtier can defend it. A future family member can demand the same courtesy. And suddenly, what began as a practical gesture becomes part of the crown's operating memory. Anne, according to reports, understood that danger with absolute precision. Her image as an institutional guardian did not emerge from one disagreement. It has been built over decades of discipline, service, and a near unforgiving respect for the rules that hold the monarchy together. She is not the royal who seeks softness from the system. She is the royal who expects the system to be strong enough to outlast everyone inside it. That is why her reported objection carried such force. It was not theatrical. It was not designed for sympathy. It was rooted in the belief that the crown is not a family possession, not a reward for loyalty, not a mirror for personal feeling. It is a trust, and perhaps that is why the public remains so fascinated by these unasked hidden boundaries. People may see royal life as privilege, But beneath the privilege is a prison of limits. Who may speak? Who must wait? Who is allowed symbolic power, and who must remain near power without touching it? The monarchy is built on those invisible lines, and when one of them is tested, even quietly, the whole structure seems to tighten. The drama is not only in what changes, it is in who dares to say that change has gone too far. For the future reign, the implications could be immense. Prince William's eventual monarchy will inherit not only palaces, duties, and public expectations, but also every precedent Charles's reign leaves behind. If ceremonial authority becomes too flexible, William may one day face pressures Anne tried to prevent. If the boundaries remain firm, then the monarchy preserves a cleaner path forward. That, in the end, may have been the true battle. Not Camilla's dignity against Anne's caution, but the present reign against the demands of the next. By Max, the end, no formal victory needed to be declared. Palaces rarely announce their most important decisions. More often, they simply stop talking. And that silence, in the end, became the clearest signal of all. The machinery did not stop. The schedules continued. The engagements remained in place. Queen Camilla carried on with the dignity expected of her station. King Charles continued to move through the burdens of reign, and Princess Anne returned to the disciplined rhythm that has defined her public life for decades. On the surface, everything appeared calm again. But inside the logic of the monarchy, calm is not always peace. Sometimes it is containment. Sometimes it is the sound of an institution choosing not to explain itself because explanation would reveal too much. There was no public confirmation of who had objected, who had supported the proposal, or how close the wording had come to being approved. That is the palace way. Nothing is denied too forcefully. Nothing is admitted, masked too clearly. The door is simply closed, the paper disappears into the deeper files, and the royal household resumes its ancient habit of letting time bury the heat of conflict. Yet according to palace interpretations, the message had already been received. The proposal's momentum had cooled. The questions Anne reportedly raised had done their work, and the crown, at least for the moment, had chosen caution over acceleration. That choice mattered because legacy inside the House of Windsor is not treated as ownership. It is stewardship. No king, queen, prince, or princess truly possesses the monarchy. They inherit it briefly, carry it under pressure, and then pass it forward marked by whatever restraint or recklessness they allowed. That was the deeper warning beneath Anne's reported objection. The crown cannot become a personal instrument. It cannot be softened into a family favor or stretched to suit the emotional needs of one reign. It must remain harder than the people who wear it. When Princess Anne emerged, colder than private desire and stronger than the storms that gather around every transition. And so Anne's influence, if these reports are to be believed, was not loud. It did not need applause. It did not require victory speeches or public vindication. It moved through procedure, through caution, through the quiet force of someone who knows where the weak points are hidden. She did not have to defeat the proposal in full view. She only had to make the palace understand what approving it might one day cost. That is the power of the old guard. Not glamour, not spectacle, endurance. For Camilla, the result remained unresolved, and perhaps that was its own kind of wound. Recognition delayed can feel like recognition denied. For Charles, the silence may have preserved unity, but it could not erase the personal strain beneath the decision. And for the monarchy, the episode became another reminder that the greatest royal battles are often fought without a single official word. They are foo. I see GHT in drafts, pauses, private warnings, and the careful refusal to let emotion harden into precedent. And inside the ancient machinery of the crown, some battles are remembered not by what changed, but by what never happened. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.